A while ago I posted about a launch swap technique I was using, and I've since found further improvements, and I'm also not sure anyone really understood the text description, so here's a video description. For context, a launch swap is if you launch, and after you release launch you unequip it. That gives you a bunch of speed. However, you have to re-equip launch. It's pretty easy to do a launch swap, I would say, but doing a launch swap fast is actually viciously difficult. And the main reason for this is that I already need to aim my mouse somewhere to aim the launch or your control stick direction. On controller it's always the equivalent, just with control stick directions. I'll talk about a mouse because I have a mouse. And then after you release launch, you want to do the following inputs very rapidly. Open weapon wheel, rush your mouse to some other icon that you want to equip, press the equip bind, close the weapon wheel. And by far the most difficult part about this is rush your mouse to some other thing to unequip. Because you're going to be aiming your launch at different places every time you do this, and if you're playing randomizer it gets worse. You're gonna have different skills every time, so you also have to move to a different spot. So this isn't one definitive movement that you can practice, it can be one of a million movements that you have to improvise. And this poses a huge risk, because if you fail a launch swap, say I want a launch swap in a great zoom over here to the platform on the other side. If I failed a launch swap, then I'm just kind of hovering in the air and dropping into a pit, and I have no speed, I have no launch left to recover until I fall all the way down and land on the ground. It's really slow, you never want this to happen. So what I am trying to do with this technique is I am trying to get this initial launch swap part as consistent as possible without doing it slowly, in order to reduce the risk of falling down somewhere, so that I can recklessly launch swap whenever I want. Now this uses multiple properties of the weapon wheel. First, the weapon wheel remembers what you had selected. Select hammer, close the weapon wheel, open it again, hammer still selected. Region still selected, sword still selected, flap still selected. And this is useful because it means you can change your equipment without moving your mouse at the point in time where you are changing your equipment. So sure, I have to move my mouse to pre-aim at hammer, but later on I can have my mouse anywhere I want, press the equip bind, and it will use my pre-selected item. This is very useful for a launch swap, because this means at the critical moment when I'm actually doing the launch swap, I can use my mouse to aim the launch without having to worry about moving my mouse into the weapon wheel. Like so. And that makes it significantly more consistent. That's the entire core of this technique. And another property of the weapon wheel, if you press the weapon wheel bind, there's a fade in animation, not what we're interested in right now. If you release the weapon wheel bind, there's a fade out animation, and this is very interesting to us here, because this means the weapon wheel is visible for longer than you hold down the weapon wheel bind. Now you cannot equip something during this fade out animation. If you could equip something during this fade out animation, we wouldn't have the problem in the first place and launch swaps would be easy. However, if you try to equip something during the fade out, it plays a certain sound. That sound. And tells you, oh, you already closed your weapon wheel, I'm not gonna let you equip anything, your launch swap fails, you fall into a pit, etc, etc. However, what you can do during the fade out animation is pre-select something. So here it had pre-selected the hammer, even though it refused to equip it. And this means what I can do is I can just press my weapon wheel bind pretty much as briefly as I can, and I still get a pretty decent amount of fade animation frames to select some item that I want. So not only can you reduce the risk at the most critical part in the launch swap by pre-aiming, you also have to open the weapon wheel for a much shorter time period than you had to, because you don't have to add like safety frames anymore. You don't have to keep the weapon wheel open any longer than necessary to account for the fact that you can't equip during the fade out, because you can pre-aim during the fade out. And what this also means is that you can use one of the steps that you're already doing during a launch swap in order to pre-aim for your next launch swap. This gets conceptually complicated. I'm gonna try to demonstrate it, and maybe that makes it a little more clear. So say I already have this sword right here, pre-selected for a launch swap. Now I'm gonna do a launch swap. Perfect. Now I want to re-equip launch, which means I'm gonna have to move my mouse to launch. However, as I close the weapon wheel, I can now also use the fade animation from this act of re-equipping launch to move my mouse over sword again. And now sword is pre-selected again for the next launch swap. So this is the general rhythm I'm trying to do now for launch swaps. Swap, re-equip, and with the re-equip, pre-aim for the next swap. This means you actually do the same amount of steps that you do for a usual launch swap. The only thing you added really was this tiny mouse movement after re-equipping launch. However, this tiny mouse movement after re-equipping launch is what allows you to suddenly launch swap with a much greater consistency, and also keep the weapon wheel open for shorter than you might usually do, because you don't really have to worry as much about failing your launch swap anymore. And that's it. Hope that makes it clearer. Hope you have some fun with it. Go and try it out. See you.